Hello, everyone, again. This is part two of the first session of your ICL professional seminar. Last video, we just briefly covered the expectations of the semester regarding the syllabus, the assignments, as well as talking a little bit about residency and the expectations there. The second part of the video is going to deal with the EdTPA task. And the first task we will tackle this semester will be planning. The topic of this video is just twofold. Who are your learners and what will you teach them? Again, it is aligned to the first task, task one, planning. We're going to emphasize two major areas in this quick video. First is the context for learning, and second is your learning segment. As a reminder, the EdTPA asks you to provide evidence of your teaching practice by providing artifacts and commentaries in three different tasks. Task one, planning. Task two, instruction. And task three, assessment. In the planning task, this is where you will upload and write about the instructional and social context of your school building and classroom. It's the context for learning. Also included in task one are parts B through E, your lesson plans, your instructional materials and assignments, your assessments, and the planning commentary. Task two deals with instruction. This is where you will teach and video your lessons, as well as reflect on your instructional practices within the instruction commentary. And lastly, task three is the assessment. This is an analysis of your whole class performance. Generally, it includes a rubric or a checklist or a manner in which you will assess student learning. And you will emphasize three focus students. And remember, one of those must be identified on the chart in your context for learning. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Embedded in all of the tasks throughout the EdTPA is an emphasis also on academic language. It's the language demands that are present throughout the learning segment that support students' learning and language development. So part one, who are your students? Again, we're going to speak and just review about the context for learning. Within the context for learning, this is your opportunity to paint a picture for the score about information regarding your placement in your classroom. You want to make sure it's crystal clear and that you include relevant information and how it may impact your instruction. You want to list any special features or resources of your school or classroom setting. You can describe your district, school, and also your mentor teacher's requirements or expectation that again may affect your planning or delivery of instruction. This could be required curriculum, pacing guides or lack thereof, the use of specific instructional strategies. If you are departmental based, or if you are in a tested area, those things may impact your planning and also instruction. So this is an opportunity within the context for learning to provide context or explanation for the score. It's very important, again, that we identify special learners. This is done on the last page of your context for learning documents. In the chart, this is where you provide information and consider the variety of learners in your class. Special learners include ELL students, your gifted students, students who have been identified and receive individualized education programs or an IEP or 504, struggling readers, and those students who may be underperforming because of academic learning gaps. These are the students that you will place on your chart and within your context for learning. And remember that you want to be as specific as possible. when you're writing your context for learning. Going back to this chart, in the event you may not have students in your classroom that have a 504 or IEP, consider those other areas that are identified there, because you will have to identify at least one special learner within your EdTPA. I encourage everyone to refer back to the Canvas modules for additional resources. We delved into the context for learning last semester, and there are resources that I'm going to transfer over to this semester's shell for your use. Hopefully, the context for learning that you wrote last semester as practice is still relevant for you today. So pull it out, dust it off, and revise as needed, and then you have that part already done. Now, let's talk about part 2 as we emphasize, what will you teach your students? This leads us into the learning segment proposal. This is the opportunity to draft how you plan to lay out your learning segment for the EdTPA. The major focus of your learning segment is the central focus. And remember, we talked about this extensively last semester. Central focus guides everything that you are going to do this semester in terms of your learning segment for the EdTPA. Your central focus should be standards-based. So this is where you're going to align with your content standards, what students will learn, and what's the big idea. Your learning task will be aligned to your content standards, again, going back to the central focus. How will you engage students with the central focus? The academic language that's required or embedded within your learning segment, as well as your teaching strategies. The central focus of the lesson plan is a description of what the lesson or unit, what you're trying to accomplish. And remember, when we talked about this last semester, this is a very brief statement, but very concise. So generally 2 to 3 sentences. We're not looking for paragraphs, because remember, there is a page limit within the commentary. So with your central focus, you want to make it within 2 to 3 sentences, very concise, and remember those verbs that you use within the central focus. It needs to convey the core concepts that you want students to develop within that learning segment. And it should go beyond simply listing skills you want students to acquire, It needs to be standards-based and conceptual. As you're planning your learning segment, and I know many of you have already started doing so, keep these 4 questions in mind. Number 1, what are you teaching your students? And what's the purpose of you teaching the content? There has to be a purpose behind your teaching and why you chose this particular set of standards to teach students. And you want to make sure that that is conveyed within your writing. How will you implement the standards or your learning objectives so that students will have an opportunity to apply strategies that you are going to teach them or skills within the content area that you are teaching? How will this lesson plan work with the entire unit or the learning segment? Remember, one word that you're going to hear said throughout this semester is alignment. Alignment. How are your teaching strategies aligned to your content standards, which is aligned to your objectives? Everything must be aligned. In addition, you want to make sure within your learning segment that there is a progression. One lesson must build upon the next. And we'll talk again more about this. This is, again, something that we talked about last semester, so this should be very familiar to you. Also, an area of focus within the EdTPA is academic language. And so the 3 major components when we talk about academic language: the function, demand, and vocabulary. The language function is the verb used to describe what is to be learned or what you are teaching. Remember, it is a verb. You were asked to identify for your learning segment last semester one verb, which is the language function that you are going to base your learning segment upon. So the same is going to be done and asked of you this semester. The language function. Language demands is how you intend to ask students or require students to demonstrate the language function that you have chosen. This is embedded in your assignments, the ways that academic language is used. And this is the assignment that you have designed, and it can be a myriad of things. It can be an essay, a response, a written response to a prompt, a sentence or two, a speech, an author statement. There are so many ways that you can assign or create assignments for students to demonstrate their knowledge of the language function. And lastly, vocabulary. These are the words that students use and should know in order to articulate their learning. And remember, there's one other thing that I want to just emphasize. Remember discourse. That's a word that you should be familiar with. Discourse is written or spoken. So you will ask students in your language demands, they can use written work or they can speak or respond to your questions as demonstration of academic language demand and function. Remember the form or the handout that you see there on the screen. Last semester, when you set up your EdTPA study notebook, we asked that you pull out and identify this handout. It's very important. Understanding academic language in the EdTPA. This resource will help and serve as a reminder of each of those components we just discussed, and it gives you a little bit more detail. Make sure you have this at your hand or your fingertips as you are planning your learning segment. So let's look ahead for upcoming tasks. Next class, we will continue to review the components of your learning segment proposal. We will look more in depth at academic language and language supports, as well as planning lessons and demonstrating student learning. It's not too soon to begin planning and writing your learning segment. I know some of you all have already had those conversations with your mentor teachers, and I encourage you to continue that because you want to establish a timeline when you can actually begin to teach and video your lessons. But a gentle reminder, you are not to teach or video lessons prior to your instructors or my approval. But you can go ahead and start planning and having those conversations with your mentor teacher. You want to review the course materials and references that's embedded in your Canvas shell. You will find a long list of things that hopefully you will find helpful in your planning process. The learning segment proposal is due Sunday, January the 28th. And again, you will upload that to Canvas. Also upcoming, we are planning again for task 1 planning. Parts A through D, the context for learning, your lesson plans, your instructional materials, and your assessments are due February the 4th. With your your lesson plans, you are to write and submit at least 4 lesson plans. Last semester, you were required to write 3. This semester, you will write at least 4. And it may vary based on the protocol. So we will discuss that in our group meetings, okay? Along with your lesson plan, remember you're going to submit all the supplemental materials of the lesson. If it's a PowerPoint slide deck, submit that. Graphic organizers, worksheets, teacher-created materials, whatever you may use to support learning that is included in your lesson plan, you will want to submit in your instructional file. You also want to begin to plan your assessments for your learning segment for each lesson plan. Remember, the EdTPA asks you to identify and write to both informal and formal assessments. This area tend to trip a little bit last semester. So go back and review the difference between informal and formal assessments. Remember in task 3 for the assessment commentary, you're going to have to write to both informal and formal, but you also are going to analyze a formal assessment. Sometimes it's referred to as a summative assessment. And again, we'll review this and talk more about it in the upcoming classes. As you have created your assessments, remember you have to create some type of rubric or checklist to assess students' work. Based on the assessment or the analysis of their performance, this is what you will base task 3 on when the time comes. So again, hopefully you will find this video helpful. It's just a review of things that we covered last semester. Remember that your task 1, parts A through D, is due February 4th, so we do have some time. However, your learning segment proposal is due January 28th. All assignments can be uploaded in Canvas. If you should have any questions concerning anything shared in this video, please reach out. Thank you.